Well, I've reviewed Superman the movie twice. Now it's time to finally move forward and talk about the rest of the Superman movies. This is Superman 2, which came out in 1980 and is directed by Richard Lester, with a lot of footage that was actually filmed under Richard Donner's direction. I'll get more into that a little later. But the movie brings back Christopher Reeve as Clark Kent / Superman, Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor, Margot Kidder as Lois Lane, and also Terence Stamp as General Zod. I'm going to be talking about the theatrical cut first, because this movie is well known for having two different versions. I'm going to start out with the one that's been around the longest. So the movie takes place sometime after the events of the first movie. It begins with Lois Lane on an assignment in Paris, where a group of terrorists have strapped a bomb to an elevator in the Eiffel Tower, but luckily Superman is there to save the day, save Lois, throws the elevator with the bomb into space. All seems to go well, except for that tiny little detail where that bomb just so happens to bump into the Phantom Zone cube that's holding General Zod and his crew. Because if you remember from Superman 1, General Zod and his crew were banished from Krypton and into the Phantom Zone by Jor-El. So now General Zod and his crew are free, and they make way to planet Houston, Earth. For what purpose? To just rule it. You don't need any other reason than that. At the same time this is all going on, Lois Lane and Clark Kent's relationship starts to get a little more complex, as she starts to get a little suspicious that the man she works with at the Daily Planet is actually the Man of Steel. Now, Superman 2 is often regarded as the best of the Superman movies. The most emotional one, the best made one. And yeah, I do agree with that statement. It is the best Superman. It is my favorite Superman movie. The first one that Richard Donner did will always be the most influential, because without that movie in particular, the superhero genre today would never exist. You can go check out last week's review for my whole spiel on how influential that movie is. But Superman 2 is admittedly well made. The reason is because it fleshes the characters out a little more. Mainly Clark Kent and the dynamic he has with Lois Lane, both as Clark Kent and as Superman. Margot Kidder as Lois Lane was an element of the last movie that I didn't really talk about that much. I mentioned Lois Lane at points, but I didn't feel like she left that big of an impact on me to mention. But Margot Kidder in the first movie was really good. She's really out there, she's determined, a little bitchy, but she's also really likable, and you buy the dynamic between her and Clark Kent / Superman, and the same applies for this movie as well. The relationship between these two is fleshed out even more, and the chemistry that these two actors have is really good. Christopher Reeve still does a great job in both the Clark Kent and Superman roles, just balancing them out and making them very different from each other, to where the two do have different personalities. And the whole drive of the relationship between these two characters is that Lois Lane is starting to get a little suspicious on the fact that Clark Kent could actually be Superman. And you see it play out, you see her go through a whole series of events where she almost puts her life at stake just to prove if Clark Kent is actually Superman. And again, you buy into it because these are two really likable characters that you do want to see together. And it lends itself to some humorous bits and also lends itself to some dramatic elements as well. And it wouldn't have worked out if the actors didn't really do a good job or if they didn't like each other. But luckily they did. And this whole deal also influenced the subplot in Spider-Man 2 where Peter Parker's trying to balance his life as Peter Parker and then as Spider-Man. However, that subplot in this movie is a little more focused because the main focus of Superman / Clark Kent trying to balance the two lives out has to deal with his relationship with Lois Lane and whether or not the two can be together. And it works out really well. Let's talk about the villains. Lex Luthor is back in this movie, once again played by Gene Hackman, and he doesn't serve that much of a purpose in this movie. Gene Hackman still does a good job, but Lex Luthor almost, in a way, feels like an afterthought. He doesn't really have much of an agenda in this movie, because he just kind of weasels his way into General Zod's crew, sort of for his own personal gain, but we never get a clear idea of what exactly he wants outside of destroying Superman. So there's not really much at stake or much to care about with his character as opposed to his plan in the first movie, which was a little stupid, but at least he had a clear objective. Here, not so much, but again, Gene Hackman does a great job portraying Lex Luthor. But the villain that steals the show in this movie is General Zod, played by Terence Stamp. This is a fantastic performance in many aspects, because General Zod and his crew are put into situations that are actually somewhat hilarious, where they're all trying to figure out their powers and what Earth is like, and the fact that they're pretty much gods. But with those humorous elements, Terence Stamp and the rest of the actors in his crew play it so seriously. Terence Stamp never cracks a smile, and there are points where it's funny, but also points where it's really intimidating. And every time Terence Stamp is on screen, he commands it. He has full control over everything that's going on, and he has some really quotable lines like, "Kneel before Zod," or "Why do you say this to me, when you know I will kill you for it?" The delivery might be a little corny, but because he has such a great voice and such strong screen presence, you buy into the fact that General Zod is this ruthless Kryptonian guy. Not much else to say there. And his plot is very basic. He just wants to rule the world. So, yeah, there's not much to that plot, but Terence Stamp does an awesome job as Zod. The special effects in this movie are definitely better this time around. There aren't that many shots of Superman flying where the actual background footage moves incredibly fast to the point where it's kind of unrealistic. Some of the composite shots are a little more obvious than in the first movie, but I think with the fact that there's none of those awkward, super fast background shots, it makes the special effects seem a little better. And once again, it's damn near impossible to see the strings whenever Superman and Zod's crew are flying around. So they did a damn good job with the special effects. It's not a flawless movie though. While it is an amazing movie, there are a few things in it that I can point out that just don't make a whole lot of sense. One thing that I really think needs to be addressed is Miss Tessmesh, who was that woman who was hanging out with Lex Luthor in the last movie. I hope to God I pronounced her name right, because the way it's spelled, that is a really out there name. But anyway, she doesn't have that much to do in the movie except break Lex Luthor out of jail and then accompany him to the Fortress of Solitude. And the thing that bugs me is not the fact that she has very little screen time, but it's the fact that Lex Luthor trusts her after what happened in the first movie, because she freed Superman. One of the missiles that Lex Luthor launched is going to hit an area where her grandmother lives, so she freed Superman on the condition that he would go stop that first missile so her grandmother could stay alive. And that one action is the ultimate reason why Lex Luthor's plan failed, why he and Otis got sent to prison. So it doesn't make sense that he would continue to trust her with getting them out of prison. I don't know. It's something that just doesn't really get addressed, and after a while, she just kind of disappears from the movie. Never comes back. I know one point of criticism with this movie is the mind-erasing kiss at the end of the movie. So, spoiler alert, I guess. If you're new to this channel, and I think it's really shitty that I'm saying it this late in the video, but whenever I do these retro reviews, usually I put in spoilers. I just don't really address it at the beginning of the video anymore, so I do apologize. But anyway, the end of the movie is finished with Zod's crew getting killed by Superman. I'll address that at some point. So the day is saved, but Lois Lane and Clark Kent come to the realization that they really can't be together. They can't be a couple, especially since she knows that Clark Kent and Superman are the same guy. So she is crying, she's bawling her eyes out. It's a really heartfelt moment. And then Superman basically gives her one final kiss and wipes her memory clean. It's kind of a Deus Ex Machina ending in an attempt to get Lois's memory back to the way it was, where she still doesn't know that Clark Kent and Superman are the same guy. But I think it definitely has some more emotional weight to it than the ending in the first movie, which was definitely a huge cop-out. And both Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder do a good job at selling the scene and making it somewhat heartbreaking. So I can see how it's just kind of a lame excuse. I don't even think that's an actual power that Superman has in the comics, since I've never read the comics, so if you have, let me know in the comments below if that's an actual power or that was just some bullshit for this movie. but I think it has enough emotional weight to make you feel something, so I'm not going to come down too hard on this aspect. On the whole, though, Superman 2 is an amazing sequel. It's one of those sequels that's definitely better than the first one, and comparing this movie to the first one is like comparing Empire Strikes Back to the first Star Wars. The sequel might be the better one, but the first one is still the more influential one. So I'm going to give this movie the same rating I gave the first Superman movie, which is worth seeing in your lifetime. It does have some issues here and there, and it does have a Deus Ex Machina ending again, but it's definitely a more well-made movie than the first Superman. And it's a shame that there have been no good Superman movies since then. Now, that's my review for the theatrical cut of Superman 2, but what about the Richard Donner cut? I just saw the Richard Donner cut a couple days ago for the very first time, and I do have a lot to say, but I'm going to save that for a different video. I have a lot to say about the Richard Donner cut that I think it's worth its own review. And rather than putting it up next week, I'm going to put it up tomorrow. So check back tomorrow to hear my thoughts on the Richard Donner cut and my thoughts on Superman killing General Zod and his crew in this movie, because I know that's something that I kind of have to address. So until tomorrow, I hope you enjoyed this review. Leave a comment down below and tell me what your thoughts are on this version of Superman 2, if and when you've seen it. And as always, this is the real Mr. Robinson telling you there is only one.